So everything is live right now. You guys are on, the video's on, everything's on. I don't like it. Okay, stop sharing. Sharing the video. I want you to I do, but it's not doing anything. I don't see it on Facebook, but I guess you guys can see it. I don't see it. Welcome, Flagstaff, and happy Juneteenth. We are live for the 65th Juneteenth celebration. Today, we're going to engage in two major conversations about Juneteenth and its history, why we celebrate Juneteenth, which is going to be presented by Dr. Ricardo Guthrie. And then Dr. Mark Beeman is going to lead us in or inform us about Confederate monuments, and we'll talk a little bit, or he will talk a little bit about the symbolisms behind it, the history, and share some of the news recently or currently of some of these Confederate monuments coming down. And then we are joined today by Sister Tara House, who's going to be helping us keep tabs on questions that you will be able to ask. So we ask that you use the comment feature to post any questions that you may have, and then at the end we will have a community dialogue. So Professor, Dr. Brother Ricardo, will you get us started?
All right. Thank you all, and thank you very much. We're going to have on the web video put together by LBM Studios, Mr. Lawrence B. McCullum, which has a fabulous 20-minute snapshot of Flagstaff celebration, so you can experience it virtually. So we're going to change the order of our presentation. So we'll talk about Juneteenth, and then monumental questions, and the question of structural racism and institutional racism that we'll present as a dialogue. So Juneteenth, June 19th, 1865, is the oldest known celebration commemorating the end of slavery in the United States. So it dates back to 1865, because it was on that day, June 19th, 1865, that Union soldiers led by the Major General Gordon Granger landed in Galveston, Texas, with news that the war was over and the enslaved were now free. So this was 2.5 years after Lincoln did his Emancipation Proclamation, which became official on January 1st, 1863. All across the country, African Americans had celebrated that day, January 1st, 1863, as a day of freedom. We'd have what? Black-eyed peas, collard greens, which they call Hoppin' John, to celebrate freedom. But there were some states that had not gotten that message yet. So the Emancipation Proclamation didn't have any impact on the enslaved people in Texas and other parts of the South who were still under Confederate control. They didn't have any Union troops to knock on their door and say you're free, and so they stayed in slavery. So there have been different attempts to try to explain why there was a 2.5-year delay. And several versions, some of them mythical, some of them narrative, some of them true, have come about since 1863 to 1865. Why didn't the people in Texas know? And I won't get into those myths. Maybe we can have that as part of the discussion. Why didn't the people in Texas find out that on January 1st, 1863, Lincoln had said, all those slaves who are held in the Confederate rebel states are now free? Well, you don't have to be a rocket scientist to know that if someone doesn't give you that message and you don't have the ability to be free, then you're still going to be enslaved. So a lot of us have some criticisms of that date, and we try to explain why it was 2.5 years before Black folks in Texas found out that they were free. So why Juneteenth? June 19th was coined because they put together June and 19, and it grows over the years in significance. It's a time for reassuring each other, for praying and for gathering, pulling together family members. Juneteenth continues to be highly revered in Texas decades later, with many former enslaved people and their descendants making an annual pilgrimage back to Galveston, Texas on this day. So what happened? General Granger, the Union general, comes into Texas, Galveston, and issues an order, General Order Number 3, which began, the people of Texas are now informed that in accordance with a proclamation from the Executive of the United States, all slaves are free. This involves an absolute equality of rights and the rights of property between former masters and former slaves. And the connection now that exists between them becomes that between employer and free laborer. This was very important because no longer would you be working for nothing. You would get paid for the fruits of your labor. Now, this wasn't the first time that former enslaved people had been free. They took their freedom. In the Georgia Sea Islands, as early as 1863, many Blacks took over the lands that had been vacated by the Confederates, and they began running their own crops. They began bartering for themselves, and they were told, no, you can't do that. That land belongs to the Confederacy. And they said, well, they're not here. We're going to take over. That happened in Georgia. That happened in New Orleans. When the Black folks were freed by the Union Army, they just took over the land. And they held that land for 2 or 3 years until they were told they had to give it back. So there was a policy that the Union Army had, which is if you freed the land and you could work it, then you got to keep it. So that was the 40 acres and a mule. Actually, the Army would give them 2 mules because there was no one there to stop them from doing it. Union Army said, go ahead, use it. We'll do it. And the slaves used that 40 acres and a mule to try to initiate their own freedom. Now, throughout the South, many of the folks who were enslaved, they also didn't know. They also didn't know that perhaps there was an Emancipation Proclamation. They had heard, so they throw down their hoe and they follow the Union Army and they go looking for freedom. As I said before, Georgia Sea Islands and also in New Orleans and certain parts of the South, that happened. So the Union Army would be traveling along and they'd have thousands of freed people following behind them. And they were called contraband of war. That means I'm going to take you over and confiscate you after I've freed you. So many of the Black folks who were working on the plantations throughout the South, as I said, became part of the liberating army that would then march through the rest of the country. There were 4 states, however, that Lincoln said you can keep your slaves. 4: Delaware, Maryland, Kentucky, Missouri, parts of Tennessee. They were told because you're loyal to the Union, you can keep your slaves. And that happened throughout 1863, throughout 1864, and all the way through 1865. So then when we talk about what's happening on Juneteenth, 1865, well, yes, the Civil War was over. And yes, the people in Galveston, Texas were told, you are now free. But what about Delaware and Maryland, Kentucky, Tennessee, parts of Virginia? They got to keep all of those Black people enslaved for another 6 months. It wasn't until December 1865 and a special amendment, 13th Amendment, that slavery was officially free. So slavery was officially ended. So how do we talk about Juneteenth in any way that we can celebrate? Well, it's because the whole idea that the Union would then allow slavery to be abolished sets the stage for what happens by the end of 1865. And they had to do this because those Southern states had the majority of Black people held in bondage. More than 4 million people who got to be freed because of the sweat of their brow. Not because someone signed a piece of paper, but because they decided that they were going to be free. So again, let's go back through that history when we get a chance to talk with Dr. Beeman and myself. Why do we want to celebrate the Southern heritage that kept 4 million people enslaved, despite the President of the United States saying that you would be free? Now, we're going to just sum up and then move on to the next part of the discussion, if I would. Juneteenth, we still celebrate it. It's like the 4th of July for Black folks. It really is. So we're going to come together, have rodeo, fishing, barbecuing, baseball. These are typical Juneteenth activities prior to COVID-19. So our virtual celebration will try to do those things. And we're hoping that you are celebrating having some collard greens and some black-eyed peas and some chicken and other delicacies that have been developed over the years. You're having your barbecue on your back porch while you're watching this. That's Freedom Day. Juneteenth also focuses on education and self-improvement, which are key themes that we'll talk about today. Not just the racism, the stereotypes, and the celebration of white dominant. We're not just going to talk about that. We're going to talk about things that are important to us. Education, self-improvement. Elders are often called upon to recount events of the day. They're often talked about and asked to tell their stories. There may be prayer services. There may be certain foods, as I mentioned before, that are popular. In addition to Hoppin' John, which is the mixture of black-eyed peas and collard greens together. That's the freedom food. We also want to talk about strawberry soda pop, red Kool-Aid, barbecue. And through barbecuing, Juneteenth participants believed that they could share in the foodways and the folkways, the spirits and the aromas that their ancestors, those who had been newly emancipated, would have experienced during their ceremonies. So during this time, many African Americans developed all of their foodways that were based on some of their African traditions. They used their celebratory events that they used, again, based on being a Creole people who were formerly African, but now African American. They were open about sharing their foods and their lives and histories to everybody. And so when we talk about celebrating Juneteenth in Flagstaff, there might be 3 to 6% who are Black, but it's all of us who want to celebrate freedom. So all of us are here today to talk about what that means as part of an American heritage, part of a Black heritage, part of Black culture and consciousness. Everybody can celebrate that. Everybody can enjoy that. Just as you would be waving your flag on the 4th of July, we ask you to raise that red, black, and green flag today, or put on your kente cloth. Celebrate African Heritage Day, Juneteenth, Freedom Day. I'm going to, again, stop talking at this point and pass the baton to my colleague, Dr. Mark Beeman, because he'll talk a little bit about what's happening today, the significance of, let's say, some of the monumental questions we're all wrestling with. And today, again, as we celebrate being in support of African Americans, it's okay to be pro-Black. It's okay to be anti-racist. It's okay to talk about the education, the history, and the heritage of what Juneteenth means. And so now I'm going to, without further ado, if I might say with Reverend Bernadine, it's okay now to talk with Mr. Beeman?
Absolutely.
All right.
Professor Beeman, you're on.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So I just want to say, if you've noticed, a lot has been happening. A lot of monuments have come down in the last year or two. Just in the last week or two, Bubba Wallace made a request for NASCAR to take down the Confederate flag at NASCAR events. They have done that. What I'm going to focus on, though, is really the institutionalized aspect of racism, how it gets embedded. Sometimes we don't even see it in the institutions that we have. And one example of that actually is Wallace's request. People might not know that Bubba Wallace, while this is a courageous solo act, he is also a product of a diversity program in auto racing that was started, initiated, funded by people like Magic Johnson, Joe Gibbs, and others. So here we have an institutional response for an institutional change, and that's going to be my theme. I'm going to focus on two ways these racial images have been passed on, the monumental questions. One are monuments themselves, and the other is film, a little bit on the film section. Before I do that, I just want to acknowledge my co-authors that I write this film work with, Dr. Frederick Gooding Jr., he's at TCU, and Marta Sol-Serpis, former graduate student of ethnic studies at NAU. So, introduction. The violence in August 2017 of white nationalists in Charlottesville, Virginia, and the killings of 9 African-American church members in Charleston, South Carolina, by a white supremacist posting Confederate symbols in 2015 drew national media attention to the issue of the U.S. Civil War era symbols honoring the Confederacy. The issue has been framed as a debate over 2 interpretations for the establishment of the statues commemorating that period. The first is that monuments are a reflection of white supremacist ideology of the period. That is basically the evidence that I found. The second, however, still reflected in the media, is that monuments are not related to white supremacy, but they're reflected in Southern cultural heritage. So this question of heritage or white supremacy has largely focused on the opinions of citizens in the former Confederate states, often about the public displays of Confederate flags or statues of Confederate officers. Sometimes the focus on these statements at rallies or public forums, we see them. Others, we see them in opinion polling. The polls tend to show white Southerners are much more likely to support Confederate displays in public and to believe such displays are reflecting culture and heritage rather than white supremacy. African Americans are much more likely to view the Confederate displays as symbols of white supremacy. At least one survey found the strongest supporters of the heritage arguments were, number one, the least likely to be knowledgeable about the Civil War period, and number two, the most likely still to oppose interracial marriage in the United States. So that gives us a clue where we're going to go. Next, after the close of the Civil War, some history, 1861 to 1865, and the abolition of slavery, the white Southern elite embarked on a mission to develop new forms of institutionalized subordination of the African American community. Significant in the process was the attempt to create a mythical reinterpretation of slavery and the Confederacy through the propagation of an ideology known as the Lost Cause. The Lost Cause ideology sought to reestablish white supremacy through educating the public by elevating Confederate soldiers and plantation owners as honorable men who cared for an inferior African American population, content to serve their masters as slaves. Instrumental in this narrative was the role of the Mammy character, represented as an African American woman willing to sacrifice out of love for her, quote, white family. Making public displays of this Mammy character were done in 2 important ways. First is monuments. So now I'm going to focus a little bit on the monument issue. Most of that focus has been on culture being worshiping white Confederate soldiers. Little known or less known in this argument is that parallel to this, they were trying to establish the role of African Americans through monuments as well in a subordinate way. In the final decades of the 19th century, two groups, the Sons of the Confederate Veterans and the United Daughters of the Confederacy, had the goal of constructing and placing monuments glorifying the Confederacy throughout locations in the U.S. South and later in other regions of the U.S. as well. While the Sons of the Confederate Veterans had some success in this endeavor, they were soon overshadowed by the organizational and funding raising skills of the UDC, the United Daughters of the Confederacy. Early on, the monuments were usually obelisks that were in local cemeteries, but later on, they were more emboldened and they moved the monuments to public squares. This lost cause imagery in the public square was incomplete without promoting the myth of the loyal African servant. One of the, this is one of the images we can see of a Confederate soldier. This is Nathan Bedford Forrest. Not only was he a Confederate officer, he was also the first Grand Wizard of the Ku Klux Klan. And in addition to that, he was known for massacring prisoners, African-American prisoners during the Civil War. One of the UDC, again, I'll use UDC for the Daughters of the Confederacy, United Daughters of the Confederacy. Most ambitious projects was to erect a national monument to Mammy in Washington, D.C. The UDC campaigned from 1905 to 1920 to construct a national monument to Mammy, the idealized African-American enslaved woman who was loyal to white families, raised their children, and defended them from all dangers. Through their influence and connections, the UDC encouraged a Mammy bill to be introduced into Congress, into the Senate, which included erecting the monument at the nation's capital, with federal government providing substantial financing for the project. The Southern Journal Confederate Veteran was strongly supportive of the monument, noting future generations would realize that Southern men were, quote, the Negro's best friend. Okay. The Mammy stereotype drew widespread protest, and so now we have organized opposition. This came from the NAACP, the National Association of Colored People, and from African-American newspapers around the United States. Also, the National Association of Colored Women, NACW, developed a concerted campaign opposing the Mammy Monument, citing its demeaning portrayal of Black women. In the end, protests by African-American organizations and their supporters, such as Young Women's Christian Association, contributed to the bill finally failing to pass in the House of Representatives. So here again, in terms of this institutionalized approach, I'm arguing that an institutionalized response is necessary. And we can see that through African-American organizations leading the way and getting coalitions and support from other organizations as well. Okay. Next, the Confederate Memorial at Arlington National Cemetery. Prior to 1900, Confederate soldiers were not allowed to be buried at Arlington National Cemetery. After 1900, the policy changed. The UDC petitioned and was granted by the Secretary of War the right to erect a Confederate monument at the cemetery in 1906. The monument was unveiled in 1914 on the birthday anniversary of Jefferson Davis, the President of the Confederacy. Examining the frieze portion of the monument, one can see that the UDC, the United Daughters of the Confederacy, indeed succeeded in bringing Mammy to a national memorial. The loyal slave is caring for white children while her master goes off to war. So if you've seen this monument on the frieze, there's many statues. This is the one in particular that I'm focused on, and that is a mythical Mammy character with tears in her eyes, crying as the white soldier goes off to war, and she's going to care for the white baby. To the delight of the UDC, the Hollywood motion picture industry brought lost cause imagery to a much wider audience as well. Here, a tandem of African American stereotypes prevailed. Number one, the Mammy character as portrayed in the monuments was on full display. But also another needed stereotype to defend lost cause could be represented here in ways unavailable to monument builders. And this was the character called the Jezebel. The plantation slave system had produced a significant mixed race population, described by terms such as mulatto, mixed black and white, or in some cases by the perceived ratio of the mix, quadroons, octoroons, etc. Southern honorable society had to explain the existence of this mixed population. Since there was no conceivable way black enslaved men would be permitted to have sexual relations with white women, this population had clearly been created by white male, black female relationships. How to find an honorable explanation for white owners forcing sexual relations on enslaved women? The Jezebel myth was created to shift blame onto the woman, a woman with no legal rights. The Jezebel was presented as an overtly seductive and sexualized character who manipulated their innocent white male owners. Hence, the rapist is defended as the victim. Both the Mammy and the Jezebel are cast in the first major-length Hollywood motion picture, The Birth of a Nation, based on the Lost Cause novel The Klansman, a historical romance of the Ku Klux Klan. Here we can see the Mammy character. This is an actor in blackface, white actor in blackface actually, and what she's doing is she is defending her white family from a black servant type character who's coming down from the north. Okay. Also, during the same film, we see another blackface character. This one in the film is Lydia, and what she's doing is manipulating a congressman so that she can push for racial equality in the United States. Both of these are seen, this one is seen as a very threatening character. So D.W. Griffith's Birth of a Nation gave audiences the perspective that good black slaves loved their white families so much that after they were freed by the Civil War, they stayed on with their former owners. They fought off black men who were portrayed as black beasts in these films, who thought, the black beasts who thought they were equal to whites. Manipulative black women are viewed not only as threatening to white men, but to the entire Western civilization. Griffin's solution to this problem was to glorify the Ku Klux Klan as the heroes. The Klan and other white supremacists lynched nearly 5,000, possibly 6,000 African Americans from the end of the Civil War to the Jim Crow period. Okay? Despite the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People actively opposing such imagery, the demeaning depictions of African Americans became entrenched in Hollywood characters. So I'm going to go through a few of these characters now and then sum up. The first African American woman to win the Academy Award, Best Supporting Actor, went to Hattie McDaniel for her role, Gone with the Wind. Here we have Hattie McDaniel, basically portrayed as the Mammy character supporting her white family. Set in the Civil War and its aftermath, this Mammy depiction also drew protests from civil rights groups, and Hattie McDaniel took the criticism quite personally. Ironically, while McDaniel was active in protesting racial justice in her Los Angeles neighborhood, the studio would only give her servant roles. When she won the Academy Award, her seating was segregated from white actors during the ceremony. Stanley Kramer's Guess Who's Coming to Dinner. Here we have a breakthrough film. The theme of the film is racial equality. What do we see in this film, though? Hollywood falls back on an old character here. This now is Isabel Sanford. She's playing the Mammy character of the liberal family in the film. Tate Taylor's 2000 film, The Help, based on Catherine Stockett's novel, attempts to paint a sympathetic portrayal of African-American domestic workers in Mississippi. Okay. However, we see this one fall back again on an old mammy stereotype role. Viola Davis's role is the second Academy Award for a supporting actress by an African American woman. She later expressed disappointment in taking the role. Here is a still, again, capturing basically her in the film. Okay. In addition to that, we have a whole host of stereotypical roles that were Jezebel characters. I'm not going to go through them all, but I'll just point out Monsters Ball, another Academy Award winning film. Here we have a still of Halle Berry. What basically happens is her son is killed, her husband is put to death in prison, and to ease her pain, she seduces a white man to have sexual relations with her, who's actually the executioner of her husband. Okay? Sometimes we see these images, both Jezebel and Mammy character, morphed together. What happens is racism changes over time. Basically, during the Jim Crow era, we saw a very type of classic racism. It was open, people admitted to it. After that era went by, we see more of a symbolic or modern racism where it's more hidden. But in films such as Bringing Down the House, here again, we have Queen Latifah, and in this role, playing Charlene, she is now confronting the Black Beast, who is actually her previous boyfriend. She's protecting her white family from this character. Okay. So just kind of to sum up, Lost Cause imagery began as a project by white supremacist groups to reconstruct the plantation slavery era stereotypes. Most visible early representations were monuments, but once incorporated into film, they reached a much wider audiences. These images have remained until the present day in film depictions and in monuments, some of which have evolved into contemporary controlling images of African Americans. So I'd just like to say, to sum up, in conclusion, monuments and films are just two examples of racism embedded in U.S. institutions today. Recently, we've seen a groundswell of activity to address police brutality. This demands institutional change. But also, there's other important issues that face us. One, suppression of voter rights, targeting African American, Latinx, and Native American communities, preventing them from their exercise their right to vote. Mass incarceration of minority citizens. We can see this starting back at the end of the Civil War, through the Black Codes, through convict leasing laws, then through the wars on drugs up to the present day. Also, organized attempts to ban ethnic studies education so our children do not know their own history. These issues need organized responses focused on institutional change. If you're interested in promoting justice for the African American community locally, seek out organizations dedicated to that cause. Several of these community leaders are here with us today. The Southside Association has been working on social justice issues for years. Seek them out, support them, join them, form coalitions with them, and work for social change. Thank you.
Right on.
Thank you so much, Brother Mark. A few things that I want to, some really good questions are here. And then we're going to show or debut our video, our Juneteenth video, before we get into our community dialogue. But one of our viewers did pose a question about what happens if we remove Aunt Jemima, Uncle Ben, Rastas from the cream of wheat? Will we remove hurt and anger, as well as the love and loyalty that is created by these stereotypes on food products? Give that to Brother Mark or Brother Dr. Ricardo.
I'll let Dr. Guthrie handle this to start.
All right, thanks, Mark. Yeah, we all have a warm, deep affinity for all of those products. We do. We've eaten cream of wheat. We like Uncle Ben's converted rice, and everyone was raised on Aunt Jemima pancakes. However, for our young folks who are coming up, I think it's important to show some of the liberatory images that might be available. In the old days, only time you saw Black folks was when they were serving others. And again, from my father's generation and his father's generation, they were just happy to see any images of Black people. They've said this. So they have a deep, warm feeling about all of those products. They do. And as we were growing up in the 1960s and 70s, and even today, to see Aunt Jemima go through her different changes, there is a type of affinity. But again, what I want to say to my daughters who are teenagers and to the next generation who are in diapers and coming up, you need the images that show Black people taking care of themselves, being empowered. It's not that servant images are bad. I mean, that's where people were doing their work. Even Hattie McDaniel said, I'd rather play a slave, right, and be paid for it than have to do it in real life. Or I think she said servant. At that time, being a domestic servant was quite prevalent at the time for Black women. And so she says, I'm doing it on stage. I'm getting paid for it. Maybe I can bring dignity to it. I'll pass that back on to my colleague, Mark Beeman, because she was very conflicted. She was very unhappy that she could not play any of those other roles. But she did say, look, let me play the role and bring dignity to it. And then maybe you'll read it differently. And I'll just say, finally, cultural images have positive and negative images. It's not solely negative. It's not solely positive. What we want is a variety. So that would be my first read about it.
A good answer. I don't have much to add, just to say that the Mammy character really is mythical. They have this older asexual woman who devotes her whole life to white children. These women on plantations often had their own children. They were being neglected. I don't think we want to glorify that. Many of the characters that were taking, or excuse me, many of the women that were taking care of children on the plantation actually were not older women who were asexualized. They were being sexually abused by men in these homes. So this kind of mythical representation, I think, actually needs to be criticized.
Very good. All right.
I want to use this time to sort of maybe insert a little historical fact that about the attire or headwear that Sister Cara and I are doing today. Mm-hmm. This historically Black hair or African hair has not been seen as being something very positive. And so when the slaves were brought over to these Americas, they were almost ordered to cover their heads because it was thought to be, our hair was thought to be hideous looking, unkept, unruly. And that was just not something that the slave master and the missus of the big house wanted to see. And so Sister Cara is adorning traditional African head attire in West African fabric called Ankara from Nigeria. And this is one of the traditional head wraps that she's adorning today. I would be seen as the unruly slave who dares to be defiant. Yet I am adorning or wearing a head wrap today and wearing one of my very first African garbs from my first trip in college to Nigeria. So we just wanted to insert that. Brother Ricardo, are we queued up to show our video, our celebration, Juneteenth celebration video, and then we will come back with community dialogue. So viewers, please use this time to start submitting your questions. Thank you.
All right, I'm gonna go to full screen so you can see it, and then just one more comment that was in the chat box. People are exhausted. They're tired of talking about images and ideas, and I agree. However, I'm of the age where I might have been talking about it for 4 decades. My daughters, however, might not. And so it's important as we reach this stage to bring people on the spectrum from lack of knowledge or even ignorance to where we are now. And so we had a group of people on our back porch who were listening to elders talk about what it meant to grow up in the South, what it meant to grow up in an America that was segregated, and what it meant to have these images like Mammy, Gone with the Wind, etc. We endured them because these films are very powerful, and we endured the products because the products are everywhere. And so it's important for the kids of today to have that conversation, even though it wearies us, it exhausts us, it makes us very tired and sad. But if you can explain it the way Dr. Beeman did, or hopefully in the comment sections that we share today, I think we'll be further ahead. Because again, what is the antidote to racism? Education. That's a start. All right, so I'm going to go full screen with this magnificent video put together by LBM Studios, Lawrence B. McCullum, and then we'll share out with Sister Bernadine afterwards. Here goes.
Every voice and sing till love and heaven ring.
The fight for freedom still continues, right? See, we have to fight for freedom, not just to end slavery. That's why we're still in this room. Because I don't know if you've been paying attention to the news, but people like myself can get a people like my son can get shot dead just for holding a cell phone in their own backyard. True story, Stephen Clark. These are the things that are happening today. Not in 1960s, not in 1860s, but today. These things are still taking place. We are still at war. We are still fighting. And that's why we're here, to celebrate the idea that even though it's raining, there's still a sun that still shines above the clouds. When I go to my brother, I go to my brother. Yes, brother, help me, Lord. Just one, oh,
My name is Ricardo Guthrie. I'm the Director of Ethnic Studies. We celebrate Juneteenth because it is the first time that African Americans got a chance to understand what it meant to be free. And unfortunately, many people didn't know that the Civil War was over and that enslavement had ended. Juneteenth is the combination of June 19th, 1865, when the formerly enslaved people of Texas found out the Civil War had been over and that they were legally free.
Juneteenth is extremely important because it signifies when the last slave finally understood that they were free, had the information that said they were free. 2 years after.
So in other words, Juneteenth is all about people who did not get the memo. Right? That's essentially what it's about, right? But not even realizing that in actuality they really were legally free.
We celebrate because we fought for our freedom So Juneteenth is sort of like the 4th of July for African Americans in the United States.
Say hold on. Come on, that's what Juneteenth is about. Come on, say hold on. Okay, tell your neighbor. Change is coming. Hold on. Don't you worry about a thing. Hold on. You can make it. Hold on. Everything will be alright. Change is coming. Hold on. Don't you worry.
There's famous people take pie, and they were telling them about the slice and the whole pie. And it's only 10:30 in the morning, and I have to go home and make more pies because I'm almost all sold out. That's how good the pies are.
He awoke with high hopes that his dream would come true. Young and black with self-esteem, so no telling what he could do. He worked his way through the night, seeing this little light of mine with no clear idea how brightly his little light would shine. He brought hope to a people, though many remained in contemplation because in reality we're still missing our equality education. See, we shy away from conversations involving identities such as race, sex, gender, religion, class, sexuality, ability, age, primary language, nationality, ethnicity. I promise you this list goes on, trust me. But understanding these intersections is a small piece of this fiction. And no one person has all the pieces to construct the big picture. That's why collective knowledge is so important. Because just like it takes a village to raise a child, it takes a community to educate a people.
Under control here in Flagstaff, Northern Arizona.
You know, just to be myself, just to know that I do have that freedom, and I do have all of these things because my people fought for us to be equal. So it's just freedom for me.
And then that's a big part, but for me, it's still, I guess I'm kind of a rebel. I still don't feel real free. I just don't feel free. And in a lot of instances, we still have to do so many things that is not freedom. It's just a lot of little things that other cultures wouldn't even think about that we have to think about. We're still Black people. We still are. No matter how we are, how rich we are, how famous we become, the world still lets us know we're Black, even though we celebrate this Juneteenth. You know, we still, and we have to do that in remembrance. We have to remind our boys that they're Black on the streets. Just so many issues that still don't come into this pod of our emancipation. So I rebel every now and then and just do what I want to do.
Please don't bother me, cause I'm feeling alright when I'm on cloud 9 at 7,000 feet. So quick when the flows in the boombox rolls up and golden AC. Then I put him in the sack when it comes to the rap. We blast on the track like a rat-tat-tat and attack with a passion and catch and blast. Adapt with the task with a hand full of back. Bag of the task, half in the lap. Build to the lines, the master of crap. Taking it from the basement to the nation and trying to bring a good vibe back to rap. That's that, no argument or discussion. I don't dig at it when I approach the subject. Take a touch, but they know that we love it. We play it for fire, and they can't touch it on the function when I wasn't at Ain't nobody worried. Ain't no
smiling lying to the races. Come on, I'll take you there on the ground up. I'll take you there, help me there. I'll take you there. I know that you care. Ain't nobody crying, ain't nobody. I know it sounds funny, but I just can't stand the pain. Girl, leaving you tomorrow. If I'm there, easy life is only everybody want to be, they want to be.
My name is Edith Weeks, and I teach for the Ethnic Studies program at Northern Arizona University. We celebrate Juneteenth because it officially, if you look at the history of African Americans, the 4th of July didn't free us. We were still enslaved in 1776. We didn't actually experience freedom until after the Civil War. In fact, the whole point of the Civil War had to do with the struggle for who was to be free and who was to be a citizen and who was not to be. And so that battle was successfully won. The rebel states fought against the United States, but the United States won. And we played a key part in that victory, and it's worthy of a celebration.
You make me happy. You make me whole. You take the pain away. I'm so in love with you. Everybody say you make me happy. You make me whole. Take me home. You take the pain away. Take the pain away. I'm so in love with you. Yeah. Everything about you is right. Everything's all my wrong. Your life changed my life. All right. Everything about you is right. Everything's all my wrong. Your life changed my life. With you is where I belong. I belong to you, Lord. Yes, I do. Happy Juneteenth. Hey, we're so happy that all of you are here. This is an exciting day for us. This is the 6th year of the Juneteenth celebration here at the historic Murdoch Community Center. And my name is Deborah Harris. I'm the board president for the Southside Community Association. And we operate the historic Murdoch Community Center, which is the building that you're sitting in. The Murdoch Center sits on the site of the segregated school Dunbar that was built in about 1926 and was desegregated in about 1952. And so we're sitting on a historic site, not the building itself. But I want to thank all of you for coming.
Broken down and tired of living life on the merry-go-round. We can walk it out. Our eyes are afraid, and I do it 1,000.
Please yourself, or if you please my hand to help yourself.
Ambition, madam, is a great man's madness.
Complete man, I speak it without flattery. Turn your eyes and look upon yourself.
Were there no heaven or hell, I should be honest.
And because you shall not come to me in death, you nail my steward. Here upon your lips I strongly regret.
Thank you.
No involuntary servitude or imprisonment is legal and forevermore. Except what?
Except that
Punished for a crime where the party has been duly convicted. Ding, 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 ding. So, technically, the 13th Amendment ended slavery, but what it also did was open up the door. They started these things called black codes, right? Whereby all of a sudden they would imprison blacks for crimes that were largely made up. Meaning, Monday you had slavery, Tuesday you outlawed it, and on Wednesday they came up with the law that said, well, if you don't have a job and if you're illiterate, you have to go to jail. And again, the purpose is not to embarrass or shame anybody, but if anything, to alert you. What is it that we don't know? Then ask the second question. Why don't we know this? Seriously, why don't we know these things if they're important?
You know you've done me wrong. You're gonna be sorry.
Someday,
The third go, man. Gone away for good. The third go, man. Gone away for good. No, you've done me wrong. But you're gonna be sorry.
When it comes to the way they have people divided into basic racial ethnic categories today, that group known as first Negro, then Black, then more recently African American, we've gone through a distinct set of humiliating circumstances in our struggle towards freedom in the greatest nation in the world. That's our reputation. And so until we're free and are actually able to experience those rights, no one in the world is free. So for me, it means that more people need to know about it. I think the more media should be here. More people should be interested and engaged in uttering the words Juneteenth. That's what it means for me.
Don't ever apologize for your blackness. So this song says, no apologies, beautiful. And I give God all the glory, amen. No apologies. Lord, you made me. If you set me free, so I am. In the mirror. Brown skin, top to bottom. Hey. Lord, you made me beautiful. When you set me free, beautiful. So I am beautiful.
The reason we celebrate Juneteenth in Flagstaff is that there was a large Southern population who came here to cut wood, to work on the railroads and in the restaurants. And they settled in south of the tracks, to try to bring together that Southern history. Juneteenth celebrates that history in ways that you really won't see in the rest of the city. And we've been doing it here at the Murdoch Center for the last 7 or 8 years, and in the city for maybe about 15 years. Juneteenth means to me music, dance, art, food, celebrating family and kinship. It means all those things because those are the elements of being a free person. It also means to me African-American joy and arts and culture, because we get a chance to show off the things that we do with spoken word, with music, with food, with dance, which we'll hear later today at the Murdoch Center. So those are the things that Juneteenth means to me.
The ways that the darkness has taught us. Sing a song full of the hope that the present has brought us. This is our rising sun. This let us march on till victory.
Wow.
Wow.
I don't know. It's that was beautiful. First of all, we have to acknowledge our little brother Lawrence for that beautiful. It's amazing how he wrapped up. What was that? 8 hours at least.
Yeah.
Yes.
And wrapped up that in 19 minutes and 2 seconds. And so we want to acknowledge and say thank you to him, but we also want to, in our African tradition, pay honor and respect to his mother, Miss Deb Harris, who is the brainchild, along with Brother Ricardo, in creating this event today, along with Mayor Coral. And by the way, I forgot to do my disclaimer. I am Bernadine Lewis. I am not Mayor Coral Evans. But we are broadcasting today from, there she is. So we're broadcasting today from Mayor Coral's home. And we're coming together today to talk about, we've spent the day with Destiny. She's here too, that's her hand. We've spent the day talking about our ancestors and paying homage to them and remembering them today. I want to point out a comment from Miss Amelia Phillips, who expressed her frustration about just wanting to move on and get beyond it. And I just want to ask her to be patient for a little while longer, and to say that because she's a little ahead of the game, and what we're having to do with, and we'll probably have to do this for a few more years with our Juneteenth celebration, is we're trying to get everyone up to speed. Ms. Phillips mentioned that she's a child of the 60s, and so I would love to hear her stories. I imagine she has some stories to share about witnessing the struggle of people of African descent here in America. Indeed, there are many days when I question our freedom, when I have to say they told me I'm free. But some days, if not most days, it does not always feel like that. So now we want to get into our community dialogue, and this is where, we entitled this portion of our community dialogue. We were thinking about we, as people of African descent, wanting to have a seat at the table. And Brother Ricardo is holding up, hold that up, Brother Ricardo. I'm going to. And we're right 307. So
Yeah.
we've already gotten a number of questions, and I'm going to ask Sister Cara if she would start hitting us with those questions.
Absolutely. So we have one of the most recent questions was on the topic of education and how can we get diversity, especially Black voices, into our school curriculum? How can we support fuller education in our schools?
Can I jump in and share and then go back from there? So I think events like this is the first level because the schools themselves may not be ready. Those curriculums have not been approved except through the usual processes, school boards, et cetera. And so it has to start with the community. This is where we tell the stories. And if you just pay attention to what was in those 19 minutes, you saw Black history, culture, and consciousness that you may not have read about in the K-12 system. You also saw a very mixed racial and ethnic group that was very reflective of the entire city. You had Blacks, Asians, Native Americans, Hispanics, people of indescribable heritage and backgrounds. They were all there and enjoying by celebrating what? Black culture and consciousness. And the last piece was they also used it as an educational forum to talk about climate change, police shootings, school funding, on and on and on. We had everything there over the last 3 or 4 years. So in short, the education has to start with the community. We have to honor what's there. And that makes it much easier for the K-12, pre-K, and higher education to then say, oh, we'll take a page from what's happening in the community. It doesn't work the other way around. We were never invited to the table to change what education is. And so that's what I see. It's a community building project that may have to take place in the community first before education recognizes it. I don't know. Beeman's been doing this longer than I, so what do you say, Mark?
A couple of things. One, it really matters who you elect to office. In the state of Arizona, the banning of ethnic studies was spearheaded by a couple of our political leaders. They're no longer in office. But the attacks that they had on the ethnic studies program in Tucson, you know, calling the program immoral, some people actually referring to it, political leaders, as sedition, these kind of things were to drum up political support, public support to ban a really good program. This program, excuse me, across the United States, Latinos graduated about 50%. When we enter high school, this program boosted the graduation rate to 90%. It was seen as a threat, not because the program was bad, but because it was so successful. You're educating the next generation here. So who you elect as your political leaders are really important, whether they're going to support these kind of programs or not.
Your voice.
You're muted.
I am. Yeah. No, I'm not. I noticed we had a comment and about how is the city working with law enforcement. And I just want to put it out there to our Flagstaff community that today is a day that we want to focus on our freedom. And we want this to be a day that perhaps we can be free from current or recent events and Brother Floyd, rest in peace, and Brother Johnson and others. I just wanted to put it out there about law enforcement. And this is, for those who know me, I always, when law enforcement here in Flagstaff comes up, I always share this story. I'm from the South, from Savannah, which is called the Dirty, Dirty South. And the reason why it's called the Dirty, Dirty South is because it still, in some parts of Georgia, maintains its racist history. And so to come out here 11 years ago and to be able to be comfortable, to give a police officer a hug, to have conversations with the police officer, that's not the story of law enforcement in the South that I have to share. And so I'm always amazed at how comfortable it has been to have dialogue with our law enforcement here, to be able to talk about racism, to talk about, a few years ago, we had a community discussion after Ferguson and after Charlottesville at the Murdoch Center. So I'm living my best life as a Black person within a society, a city where law enforcement is ever present. So it's not that we won't have these conversations in the future about law enforcement here in Flagstaff, but today we just want to focus on the triumphs, the achievements, just focus on the freedom that we have right now in this very moment. Sister Carr, can you give us another question?
Yes. So one that has come up a lot is the question of what can we do now? What are we looking at as a Flagstaff community? One question was essentially asking who the work really belongs to right now. Is this a thing that is still being driven by the Black community? Is it white people's turn? Is essentially how the question was phrased. But so what is happening and whose responsibility is it to move the conversation forward?
Well, let me go to an overview and other people can chime in. All right. This is the George Floyd moment. It really is. I mean, just like when Emmett Till was murdered in the 50s, it set in stage a whole series of actions and reactions that swept the country and the world. And the same is true for George Floyd. We do want to say her name. We do want to talk about the women who have been murdered by police as well. It's not just Breonna Taylor and Sandra Bland. There are a whole bunch of other names who have been eliminated from the discussion. So it's a George Floyd moment that should give light to women as well as other indigenous folks who have been killed. But it's still a George Floyd moment. And it'd be a problem if we didn't recognize that. So Black people and their culture and their consciousness is being brought forward. I won't say just because of what's happened with George Floyd. There's been a lot of things that led up to this moment. But let's take this moment to talk about what is Black culture and consciousness. And is it just about fighting against the police? Is it just about reform? I say no. There's a whole bunch of things that happen in Flagstaff that go beyond policing and sentencing. It's a good start, but let's go from here. And what I would say is that events like this set a stage for the dialogue. First thing has got to be the education, the dialogue. I like people holding up signs. I like them stopping traffic. I like them trying to raise people's consciousness. But behind the scenes, I want to see them come to the community meetings and say, what more needs to happen? What more do we need to do? So one, it's a Black moment. Two, in solidarity, let's find out what Black history and culture is about. And three, after you put down your protest signs, come to the meetings and say what else is happening, because it's intergenerational, it's multicultural and multiracial. There's not been a successful social movement that isn't multiracial, multicultural, multigenerational. But sometimes they're led by Black people. And why is that? I don't know, Beeman or Kara or Sister Bernadine, if you could talk to that thing. What other moment is it for other people at this time?
Sister Carr, you wanna answer that one?
Sure. So I very much agree with you, Dr. Guthrie. I think this is very much a moment that has been shaped around the narrative of what happened to Mr. Floyd and to Breonna Taylor and to so many other people. So it is a conversation that I think starts within the Black community. I think there is a very important thing that's happening right now in the fact that so many people are starting to see the importance of elevating Black voices and standing in that solidarity as allies rather than taking over the conversation. And part of the conversation that we're starting to enter into, I think, is that conversation of what is the Black lived experience, in particular here in Flagstaff. What is the Black lived experience in a broader landscape of Arizona and the broader landscape of the United States of America? And it's so fascinating to me that it's spreading across the world into what's the Black lived experience in all parts of the diaspora, and what does that contribute to all of these ongoing narratives of race and history and all of these things coming together. So we're in a very interesting time. There's a lot of work to be done. I agree that it starts within the community, and we need those allies to come alongside and to help with the elevation of those voices.
I just want to make sure that we're all on the same page right now and in this moment. This event was created to be a celebration. We're getting a lot of comments that would really take us into some very deep conversation. And I would be the first one to say that we do need to have those conversations, and we will have those conversations. And today we really just wanted to celebrate. If you were really watching that video, there was lots of singing and dancing, poetry, fun and games, and that's typically what a Black celebration looks like. The only thing that was missing was the macaroni and cheese and cornbread and iced tea with barbecue chicken. But I want us to stay focused, and I still want to thank everyone that's on here right now for joining in this celebration. This would have been a day where my great-great-grandmother, Miss Katie Brown, would have been like, I ain't got to worry about massa today, my day. So today is our day. That I'm remembering. Yes, I'm remembering the struggles and challenges of my ancestors, but I'm also rejoicing that Miss Katie was free and was one of many slaves that could be able to say that she got her 40 acres and a mule on Sapelo Island, Georgia. So we celebrate today, and we thank you all, and we promise that we're starting it out with a nice celebration, but I promise we're going to sit down and cry and get angry together when we begin to have these hard conversations about how do we get over this. So, but we celebrate today. So, Sister Cara, can you give us another question from the community?
I want to go back to an earlier question that was asking for the context of using Juneteenth as a time for Black pride, culture, consciousness here in Flagstaff. The question directed towards the specific fact that the Black population is about 3 to 6% of Flagstaff. So providing some of that context for making this a broader celebration.
Well, I noticed that many of the things that we have to do in the modern world connect us to a global continuity. So even if we might be 3 to 6%, the Black experience does shape the American experience and the global experience in very profound ways. So if I were in Wyoming or Idaho or Maine, I'd still want to know what's happening with Black people and why everybody's so angry. Or why is Black culture and consciousness so powerful? Since we look to our sports stars and our celebrities and our singers and our actors and even our politicians who are doing fabulous things. Again, it's not about the percentage. It's about what are the vexing issues, the quality and the quantity of the type of lives we want to live. And I do believe that ultimately you are the product of your community. So if I see myself as just 3%, maybe I'm never the majority, but I see myself as part of Nigeria, right? And Mozambique and Australia and New York, where Black people are not just 3%. Actually, most Black people live in majority Black communities. And going back to Juneteenth, why is that important? Juneteenth is a reflection of Black culture and consciousness, which was the majority throughout most of the South. Most of the South were Black communities. Yes, because Blacks were the majorities who were enslaved in Mississippi, Alabama, Georgia, North and South Carolina. Those were majority Black areas. And people don't think about that. We were not minorities, we were majorities. And so I want to say, finally, American culture is Black culture. A lot of the things that we do, the foods we eat, the way we speak, the things we think about, they're heavily influenced by Black classical thought and philosophical thought. And this is one of the things I learned when I was applying to be part of the ethnic studies faculty. I asked Beeman and them, like, what, if it's just 3%, why should I come? And well, I found out there was more than 3%. I think that's an undercount. I don't know. There's other things that could be said about why Juneteenth is significant for what we're doing today. I don't know if either of you want to add anything to that.
Dr. Beeman, did you have any thoughts on that?
No, I think you stated it pretty well. Yeah, and also to follow up just on something Bernadine had said about people want to have more discussions. There's going to be a list of those topics coming out, I think, from your group soon, and they're going to be invited as a community to come in and discuss those issues very specifically.
Very good. Very good.
Ricardo, do we have another question from the community?
A lot of the earlier questions did kind of drive back into what you were talking about, Dr. Beeman, with the history of the statues and symbols and the question of why are those still topics of conversation? What is the significance of having that conversation? Should they be removed? Is that erasing American history? And how can we refocus that conversation to a celebration of our history while still recognizing some of the problems that have existed from our past?
Yeah, well, I think we can applaud. They are being removed. They are coming down. This is a movement that has a lot of momentum now around the United States. And the other thing that's very heartening that I see in terms of the Juneteenth celebration is how performers and athletes have really stepped up to take the lead on many of these conversations. And so I see this in a very optimistic way. We saw this occur in the 1960s, obviously, when a lot of athletes and performers were on the front lines in terms of moving the society forward to more justice issues, but you can see that being repeated right now. And so for me, that's a very encouraging type of time. Just the other thing I want to say in terms of the issues keep repeating themselves, that, as I said, these are institutionalized problems. And what happens is once an issue gets addressed, we saw this in the Gooding comments video. Once it gets addressed, people who are committed to inequality in the United States often are not willing to sit back and let it happen. They're coming forward with a new form, a new way of trying to still suppress people's rights to freedom. And so this is an ongoing event, it's an ongoing experience in the United States. So I think what we have to do both is we celebrate it, but still be knowledgeable and being aware, and we constantly have to be vigilant about how to push forward for social justice.
Yeah.
Very good.
Dr. Guthrie, did you have thoughts on that one as well?
Well, yes. Again, when we do talk about it, we went back and forth about how much we're going to go into, the symbolism and stereotyping, et cetera. And are we moving ahead to actually advocating reforms, et cetera? I think we're still at that first stage, right? We're still just trying to figure out what is the shape of the concerns that we have and the problems, and then we'll get to the reforms and the ideas. But there are a number of policies and considerations that come out of the shared experience, right? So that we will not just be honoring celebrities and people who are speaking up, but we actually take control ourselves. There has been a South Side neighborhood development plan, which has been on hold for the last couple of months during COVID-19. There are a lot of other things that were happening in terms of affordable housing that we haven't really talked about. So I'm saying let's use this moment now where we can celebrate what's happening among the interests and consciousness of people around the world to actually see what's happening in Flagstaff. And I don't know, I could say more about celebrities and that thing. I just want to, put out there are people like Dave Chappelle who says, like, if you're looking to me for the answer, you're looking at the wrong person, because it's young folks who are going to do something. Let them have their moment. They're in the streets for a reason. If they need support, give them the support. But you're coming to me as a celebrity to explain what is already there. And if you do that, then you really are not paying attention to what young folks are. So again, Dave Chappelle, as you know, is outspoken. He will keep saying things, keep doing things. And it may not always be in political alignment with what you're doing. He said that. I'm a celebrity. What kind of people are we if we're looking at a celebrity for your political answers? That doesn't make any sense to me. And of course, he's tongue in cheek because he knows he has a lot of influence. So I just wanted to put that out there. If you haven't heard what Dave Chappelle has said, I would investigate it because it's very provocative. And again, it's not always in political alignment. That's not his purpose. He said so. But I do think he said, I want you to turn back and look at what's happening in the streets with these young folks and listen to what they're saying and what they're asking. So I'm hoping events like this, Sister Coral and Kara and Mark, will get people to keep asking the right questions. Because it'd be foolish to say, hey, I got the answer. Beeman has the answer. Mayor Coral has the answer. That's not how it happens. We have to make the answer. And part of it is telling the stories that need to be told. I don't know if that helps address some of the questions we're considering.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I would like to put out there to the community the message that Brother Dave Chappelle shared. I would encourage, and that Brother Dr. Guthrie is referencing, is Dave Chappelle just it's been 2 weeks now, did a 20-minute monologue. It's called 8:46.
Yeah.
The time that it took Brother George Floyd to die on the streets. And so I would encourage everyone to check it out. It's on YouTube, and it was produced by Netflix. But they did not put it on Netflix for viewing. They put it on their YouTube page. So please check it out. Dave Chappelle, 8:46.
Yeah.
Something that the mayor is pressing upon me to mention, and I've seen some comments today from a few of our European American community members. And I think Brother Ricardo mentioned it just a moment ago in one of his comments. the comments were that Black folk, we've always been inclusive for the most part. And if you didn't know it until today, after you watched that video, you will see that and if you have some people of color of African descent as friends or colleagues, you will see that we will go out of our way to be inclusive, and we do that because we want to be included. And so we figure if we model the behavior of what it is that we desire, that we will get that respect or consideration in return. And so I appreciate Ms. Phillips, and there have been two or three other comments from our community members who have brought that point up, that basically people of color have always tried to strive for equality. And so we've done that. We've tried to mimic in our dress. You know, we don't always wear our African attire. We wear Calvin Klein and Michael Kors and whoever. I mean, so we're trying to fit in. We're trying to get that seat at the table, which is what we're talking about right now. Sister Carr, do you have another question from the community?
I think the overall thing that now the conversation has started to move towards is that idea of bridging across the generations, and how do we bring what the young people are focusing on to make sure we're not excluding our elders and those who have come before and done some of this work in the past, to learn from their experience. I think that's the big question. And how can we continue to encourage the upcoming generations who are starting to do some of this work now without excluding our elders and without risking, forgetting to learn from that experience.
Sister, will you answer that question by sharing the recent experience that we had with some of our youth who are leading the local Black Lives Matter movement here? We were recently, and when I say we, Brother Dr. Ricardo, Madam Mayor, yourself, and I were in a recent conversation, and I think that would give a good illustration to what needs to be done and what we're trying to do here in Flagstaff.
Yes, I do think a lot of the work that people are talking about in terms of bringing the generations together happened at that group, where you see the young people who are very passionate and on fire for what's happening right now, coming and wanting answers to questions and wanting to know, where do we go from here? How do we keep this conversation going? Do we march? Do we write letters? Do we, go to city council? What do we do? And what kept being driven during that conversation, and the point that kept getting made, was we all were coming from different places throughout the country, and yet found ourselves together here in Flagstaff. We're coming from different generations, and many of those that were at that table have been part of this same conversation before and are still part of it now. Some are very new to the conversation and working to educate themselves. So I think a lot of the answer to that question is, how do we bring folks to the table and make sure we're hearing from everyone? Is we bring them to the table and make sure we're hearing from everyone. Part of the answer is the doing. I always go back to that phrase of Sankofa, which means do not be afraid to go back into the past to retrieve what was left behind. And I think that's so important to the conversation we're having now, that we need to pursue the wisdom of our elders and from people who have been part of this conversation for a long time to learn what have we tried before, what worked, what didn't, what can we try now, and to bridge that gap between the past and our future.
No, that's really good. We had a couple of internship projects over the last dozen years or so that started with getting the elders to speak to the young folks and vice versa. And we started very small, right? Having a class with Mayor Coral at the Murdoch Center on community organizing, social movements, and social transformation. I think it was like a 16-word course, but people would practice about what it meant to be in a social movement, what defined a movement. And then we had elders, I think we had Sis Bernadine talk about what it meant to be in the civil rights movement. And we had Rod from down in the valley come and talk about how he went from being a youth to being a Black Muslim to being a civil rights leader to being an actor. And it was powerful. So we do know there are models for that, and that many people who come to Flagstaff are here on the crossroads, right? It's where many things cross and converge. We're on the Navajo Nation. We're right here in Flagstaff. There are 11 other tribes who come up here and consider the sacred peaks. So people are always here. In fact, in this window, none of us are native to Flagstaff, but we here because we know our Flagstaff native, Coral Jean Evans, has set the table for us. And it is hard to become part of that community, but it's also good because then we see the 2 or 3 generations that's come through Coral's house and Reverend Sims' house and Reverend Clayton's house. We see that they are opening the doors for us. And we may not see that originally or if we're here to be students or teachers, we may not see that unless, right, we try to do things like this. So I just want to give a shout out to Reverend Clayton, Reverend Bryant, and many of the elders, Reverend Sims and Mrs. Lockett. Once you get to know them and you have opportunities to work with them, well, you're in for life. But if we're just going to come in and say, I have this issue and I want this to change overnight, then we really haven't done our homework. And I'll toss it back to Beeman because in many ways, we see a lot of the academic units studying Black people, studying Indians, studying LGBTQ, but we don't see them doing anything for them. And so an ethnic studies curriculum and their other departments do take it as their mission to do exactly what Kara was asking about, intergenerational, multiracial, cross-disciplinary work. I don't know if you want to speak to that, Mark. It's something that I think has been part of your work for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think you explained it really well. I don't have much to add. I just said, if you want to help a community, you have to reach out to that community. You have to speak to community leaders. You have to spend a lot of time listening.
Listening.
And I think that's what the meeting you had last week was all about. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, one more thing about that. Thank you for reminding me. Was that this is their moment. I mean, we had the anti-apartheid movement, right? We had African liberation. We had the civil rights movement. That was still going on when we were kids. And what do they have? They have global warming. Well, it's kind of hard to wrap your arms around that. I mean, it really is. You can pick it if you want. You can demonstrate, but it's very hard to use that as a movement. So right now there's a movement for them. And my goodness, let them ask the questions, let them make mistakes, and let's be there to support them, right? Because that's what we had when we were young. We didn't know, right? But we learned it. So I don't know. That was my memory from last Friday, that they've been looking for a movement that will excite them. And, you know, global warming is serious, but you know how it is. All right, go ahead. I think you're muted, Dr. Reverend. Yeah.
No, I was I'm sitting here in the background, and I guess people are probably like, what is she talking to? I'm sitting here having some serious dialogue with my niecey here today.
Oh, okay.
And I'm also looking at the time. I want to say there was a comment that came. This one, I got to share this comment from my sister queen, Sean Thomas. She said, it's bearing witness by taking the time to seek out and listen to one another's stories and believe them.
Okay.
So I just felt like I needed to put that comment out there. And I want to remind the community that we're coming back, and I'll say it at the end, we're coming back in another week or so with another community dialogue, and we're going to continue to do this. So the mayor ordered me to remind the community, and happily so, I'm happy to do it, that we're getting ready to start some serious dialogue in the community, because I'm seeing some community members they have programming ideas that they would like to implement and head up and invite other community members to be a part of. I'm seeing my brother William Seven saying, and vote for candidates who put human rights and civil rights as the foundation of their campaign.
Right on.
All the others cannot be trusted. So that's a serious statement. I felt like we needed to put that out there. Thank you, my big brother Seven. I wanted to again thank everyone for coming out, and now I want to put a deep question out there. What I've been doing is having this sidebar conversation with the mayor's daughter, and she's my niecey. And so this is a question for our two professors. Necropolitics, are you familiar with Brother Mark, Brother Ricardo? Okay, so Destiny's question is, would any of you agree that the system is run on a political machinery that is designed not to protect and control life, but to produce death in vast quantities? What say you, professors?
Wow. Are you ready? Shall I start and give you the ball? Man, this is rough. From my perspective, Destiny and others, it is definitely right a rush towards death. And there's an aesthetic of death that we embrace here that is really quite defeating. But I'll tell you what, there's been an experience through African Americans, indigenous folks, and others who fought against colonial death and genocide for generations. They know that the necropolitics will not control their destiny, because this is not the only plane. We have a spiritual destiny that is cosmo in orientation. And just because we're on the physical plane where we are sacrificing and being sacrificed doesn't mean that the battle is over. In fact, that's one of the jokes that the Hopi give us. They'll be up looking down and say, you destroyed yourselves, huh? After everything has been said and done. And I do believe that sincerely, that ultimately, if we just focus on fighting against the necropolitics, we may indeed miss our moment, because there are a lot of folks, a lot of Black folks, Black trans folks, LGBTQ in the Black community who had to sublimate their experience in order to be heard. But it didn't stop them from being who they were. They knew who they were, right? Got two faces for the world to see. One's for white folks, the other's for me. And so they didn't mind playing the role if they had to. Their Black trans lives were not understood to the general public, but behind the scenes, they were recognized by their family, and that was enough. Otherwise, it was all death and destruction and no hope for them, because they couldn't be who they were, right? Now, we'd like to believe in 2021, we can be who we are. But I think when we do that, we do invite death, because what happened to George Floyd? What happened to Sandra Bland? What happened to Breonna Taylor? They were just being themselves, and yet we're going to evaluate them based on some false politics, I think. But I agree with you. It's designed to destroy the communities from which we come, and it's designed to lead to a certain death. And most of our allies and our accomplices have to see that they need to get off of that train because it only leads to death. We're lucky in our generation. We didn't go through World War II or the Korean War. Millions of people lost their lives. And I thought that was purposeful. It was designed to destroy millions of lives. And I'm not talking about a conspiracy. War itself is a conspiracy designed to destroy people's lives. So I don't know, Mark, necropolitics to me is the idea that you could never get out of that destiny. So Frantz Fanon was talking about that, and so was Orlando Patterson, that we have a type of social death that can never be changed because that's what the system is designed to do. And so we're systemic people, right? We're professors who talk about that, but there's some things that you can do to get out of that system of oppression and certain death. And part of it is the joy and celebration of being Black, Indigenous, gay, straight, whatever. It's part of that celebration that we honor. Because if we just look at the logic of it, then yeah, there's certain death. I mean, anyway, I was going on and on. What do you say, Mark, about the necropolitics not being our fate, but something that we can consider as we march towards humanity and living life, loving life?
Yeah, I'm kind of approaching it from the other direction, and that is on the positive side, moving towards social justice. So whatever gets in the way of social justice, that's what we have to address. I don't want to be pessimistic about it, but building off much of the social activism that's occurred in the United States. I mean, the civil rights era was a tremendous era in pushing towards social justice. A lot gets accomplished. Obviously, we know there's a lot still embedded in those institutions that needs to take care of. But for me, keep the eye on the prize, keep the eye on social justice, and keep moving ahead.
Does that address something, Miss Destiny?
I want more, but I just not in class. So.
Well, we'll give you more, but we'll do more. We try to hail that through the ethnic studies program as much as we can. And again, it is the part that's in between what's on the page and what we're allowed to say without rage. What's on the page and what's without rage. And I do again want to go back to Sean's comment was bearing witness. Sometimes people say, you're telling these stories, what's the answer? And you see like, wait a minute, let's bear witness first and hail those people, and then we'll figure it out. Because if I'm going to say, here's the answer, I'm going to destroy the lives and the stories that people have told before us. And that really isn't, I don't really think that is a realistic view of how change works. We want to read a book and say that's it, but no, it has to be recreated again through people like yourselves and others who are asking the right questions. Yeah.
And I'm going to put it out there that maybe we can, as a part of this community dialogue that we're about to begin, that we have some community lectures. You know, that we all need to further our education, continuing education. And so perhaps this would be one of those topics for a community lecture series. The mayor, we've had some comments. People are asking how will they find out about the dates of upcoming events. And everyone, please keep in mind that while we're dealing with COVID, we will continue to use an online platform to come together as a community. The mayor just put up the Facebook website, web page, the Facebook page, facebook.com Murdoch Community Center.
Okay.
That's facebook.com Murdoch Community Center.
Okay.
Today has been wonderful.
I know.
The only thing we were missing was our traditional foods and our live music. We certainly have been blessed by the video that really helped us reflect. For for those who have been celebrating with the Murdoch Center during Juneteenth, but it gave our new community friends that are new to the Juneteenth celebration a taste of what that celebration has been here in Flagstaff for 65, maybe a little over plus years.
Yes.
Sister Cara, did you have a closing comment?
I'd just like to say thank you to everyone who was part of the dialogue that we've had today. Thank you to those who are viewing and participating, asking great questions, trying to become part of that conversation through education, edifying themselves, looking to go out into the community and edify others. I think part of this is it's an ongoing conversation that we are nowhere near the end of. And so to see that the community is coming together to be part of this conversation, keep it going, looking backward, moving forward is all just a wonderful thing to see.
It really is. Brother Mark, do you have any closing remarks for us?
Well, thank you so much for inviting me, and I want to thank the people who organized this and put it together. It's a lot of work under challenging circumstances, and I'm hoping next year we can do it in person.
Yes.
Yeah. And so in our Black tradition, this is, we relate everything to our spiritual lives in Africa. So this has been much like a spiritual coming together. Some people would say like church, like coming into the mosque.
Yes.
So in closing, I'd like to share some words from Langston Hughes.
Do it.
I too sing America. I am the darker brother. They send me to eat in the kitchen when company comes. But I laugh and eat well and grow strong. Tomorrow I'll be at the table when company comes. Nobody'll dare say to me, eat in the kitchen then. Besides, they'll see how beautiful I am and be ashamed. I too am America. Thank you, Flagstaff, for joining in, and we'll see you again at our next community dialogue.
All right. Thank
Give
you.
us a seat at the table.
Harambe.
Blessings, Flagstaff.
All right. Thank you.